Welcome to part 5 of the entire plot of Queen of Shadows. Today we're going to be going over chapters 44 through 55. Just kidding. 45 through 55. And of course, we are going to be referring back to stuff that's already happened, but we are not going to discuss anything that happens past chapter 55 today. Let's start off strong with two fairly short chapters. First, chapter 45, this is in Valg Dorian's POV. It's just to show that Dorian is still very much fading away and just to kind of show what he's going through right now. Basically, the Valg version of himself and his body is very much just feeding on the torture of rebels in the underground cellars underneath the palace library. Then chapter 46, Aelin is being summoned to the Assassin's Keep because Arobynn is dead. Remember, that's how we finished the last part, which was Lysandra killing Arobynn. And then she accepts that she needs to be Caelena Sardothian just one more time. And this is more significant than you think. We'll touch a little bit more on that in a couple chapters, but all you need to know is that Rowan and Aedion do not recognize her when she kind of steps into this Caelena persona. Chapter 45, Aelin as Caelena comes in guns a-blazing into the Assassin's Keep livid, and all of the other assassins are gathered there to basically try to figure out what in the world happened to Arobynn and also for the reading of Arabynn's will. What you need to know is that all of the assassins who work under Arobynn are there, as well as Lysandra, because obviously she was in his room when he was murdered. And then obviously there is Clarice there as well. We've talked about her briefly. And then off the bat, Aelin starts throwing accusations at Lysandra. And at first it's kind of like, whoa, what's happening here? Like for a second, when I first read this, it feels like, is Aelin betraying Lysandra? But of course we know she would never do that. What it actually is she is trying to get them to rule her out as a suspect off the bat. So throwing out such a strong and emotional accusation makes people be like, okay, Caelena, cool it. She couldn't have done this. And it works. So next she demands to be taken to Arabynn's rooms to investigate. And the funniest part of this is when she sees Arabynn's body, the only thing going through her mind is, what did Lysandra do to this man? Because guys, Lysandra was not trained to be an assassin like the rest of them. So let's just say the slitting of the throat of Arobynn was not as clean and as efficient as it probably should have been, and Arobynn was dying for a long period of time until he finally took his last breath. And that's the least vulgar way I can think to phrase that. So they're looking around and Caelena's pretending to be just super livid and upset about this and devastated, of course, when the man from the bank is there to read the will. So they all go downstairs into this like lounge area, and sure enough, in the reading of the will, there's like a minuscule portion that goes over to Clarice, and she's upset because I don't understand why, but she really thought that she was getting like a lot of it for some reason. So she's very upset. But everything else was left to Caelena Sardothian. People are livid. They're like, hold on, you haven't even been an assassin in the keep for so long. Why would he give you everything? And Caelena just kind of pulls like well, I've always been his favorite. Like, of course, like, why didn't you expect this? Honestly, everything explodes. So Caelena turns to all the other assassins, especially the ones that she knows are responsible for Sam's torture and betrayal. And she just tells them like, get out. This place belongs to me now. Also, if you remember from Assassin's Blade, when Caelena and Sam decided to step away from Arobynn Hommel, because he owns the client list, they couldn't get any jobs, which is why they got into the whole situation they did that resulted in Sam's death. So she also has the rights in the will to the client list. She owns quite literally everything. She also owns all of their stuff, because that was technically Arabynn's. So they don't get to take any of their clothes, their rooms where they sleep at night, like they all live there. So she's taking their home, she's taking their belongings, she's taking their jobs. Like they have quite literally nothing but the clothes on their backs right now. And she's like, all right, get out. This place belongs to me. That's crazy. Meanwhile, while that whole argument's going on and all the assassins are absolutely freaking out and trying to fight with Caelena, Rowan has the realization Arobynn Hommel would not have left everything to Caelena. And that's when it occurs to him that you remember how I told you to pay attention to the fact that Aelin has been making a lot of errands to the bank recently, like an insane amount of errands to the bank. And even when she went with Rowan, she told him to wait outside. So this is how we realize that Aelin has been planning for this for a long time. And this goes a lot deeper than just revenge on Arobynn. She has been planning a way to fund her war, and she's doing it on Arobynn's dime. Not that he's alive to care anymore. So as she's kicking them all out and they're losing their minds, Aelin goes, well, I guess you could buy the Assassin's Guild back. Because she doesn't care about the Assassin's Guild. She doesn't want this life anymore. She just wants the money. So all of the assassins pitch in with basically all of their earnings and give it all to Caelena. So this is how Aelin has now funded her army, her war, and her path to the crown. Now, remember how I said that she had to jump into being Caelena? This, I think, chapter is so stinking cool because it has been, 180 chapters at this point since we've really seen Aelin in true Caelena form. And something that is so exciting and unique and amazing about this scene is that Sarah J. Maas doesn't exaggerate the Caelena-ness in this chapter. If you think about it, the Caelena we see in this chapter is the same one we see in book 1 and the same one we see in Assassin's Blade, but what we haven't seen is how she has gradually healed through the last couple books. And so seeing the drastic from one chapter to the other of a healed Aelin to a traumatized Caelena is insane, and it really helps put everything that Aelin and Caelena is going through in perspective. And that is the end of part 1 in the book, and we are now jumping to part 2, Queen of Light. This is going to start off chapter 48 in a Manon POV because she's having a really bad day. She started off the day having to publicly beat Asterin in front of all the other witches at Morath because she lost her cool at her publicly, so she has to be punished publicly. That's just the way of witch culture. And she was already in a bad enough mood when she was summoned to see Duke Parrington, and he said, hey, I need another coven to do my funky little breeding experiment, but they have to be Blackbeaks, and there are no exceptions this time. Then he reveals that he has a mission for the 13. We're actually going to flash forward straight to this mission where the 13 are all on their wyverns off to this village. Now they have a couple people with them like Duke Parrington, but on Manon's wyvern with her is Caltaine. Duke Parrington commands Caltaine to release her shadow fire on this village, and I will remind you that Manon has seen things. She is a creature of brutality. She has seen the worst of the worst, and she simply cannot stomach seeing this village go up in shadow fire basically. But then Caltaine gets to a point, because remember, there is the well, or that battery analogy that we made of how magic works in the Throne of Glass world. So Caltaine does end up almost draining her battery, and she does need to stop. She practically collapses in exhaustion, I think are the exact words used in the chapter. And then Manon and the 13 are commanded to land in the village and basically kill off any survivors. Chapter 49, we are gonna jump back to Aelin's POV, and she is with Aedion and they're going on a walk. Aedion just opens up to her and gets vulnerable, basically saying, I hated being in the Assassin's Guild these past couple days. I hated seeing how you grew up. It makes me hate that we were separated and feel so sorry that I wasn't able to protect you from that life. It was a very sweet sentiment. It's very well worded. It's very beautiful. It's like an apology, but he's also not accepting that it's his fault. So we're also seeing Aedion heal here. He doesn't think it's his fault, everything bad that's happened to Aelin. It's more just like a loving cousin wanting the best for the person that they love. And it's a very sweet and tender moment. And this is the moment where Aelin, I guess out of guilt, she's like, shoot, he is so vulnerable with me. He has opened up his heart to me, and he is such a good cousin, and I can't tell him my plans. This is ridiculous. So she does open up to him, and she basically says, I have 3 things that I want to do before I go up to Terrasen and take my crown, which he's been asking her nonstop for this whole book, so it's about time, she told him. She said that she is going to release magic by blowing up the clock tower. Then she's going to dethrone the king, and then she is going to kill Dorian. First order of business is releasing magic. Dethroning the king and killing Dorian are interchangeable, whichever conveniently is able to happen first, but those are her 3 priorities, and then once those 3 things are done, they can go to Terrasen. Later that night, Rowan does report back to Aelin that he has been hunting Lorcan, and Lorcan is still alive and well in here, so that's at least some news whatsoever. And then we're gonna jump to Lysandra's POV the next day because her and Aelin are disguised as proper ladies on their way to a bakery. They get to the bakery and ask for someone named Nellie. This is not an important character. As far as I remember, we don't see Nellie again ever. But Nellie is someone who works at Nesserin's father's bakery, and she is believed to be a opium dealer. Her 5 to 9 outside of her 9 to 5, if you will. And they come to Nellie acting like they're interested in buying just to really scope out where the shadow market now is, because they used to know that the shadow market was in the sewers, but ever since the king had it burned out, they're wondering if it's popped up somewhere else. Nellie then reveals to them that if they're interested in buying some, then they need to go down to the catacombs. So we have our ground level, the village, if you will, Aelin. Then we have the sewage system, and then there is a 3rd and 2nd level underneath even the sewage system called the catacombs, and that is supposedly where the shadow market has popped up again. They meet up later with Nesserin and Aedion to report all this back to them when something really stinking funny happens, and this is kind of a side note, but it's a side note that I think is worth noting. So Aelin and Aedion are making jokes about how frightening Lysandra would be because they're talking about when magic is released, and Aedion makes a joke that it would be terrifying if Lysandra turned herself into a ghost leopard, and Lysandra was not familiar with this creature, so she asked Aedion about it, and here's exactly from the text. Devils cloaked in fur, they live up in the staghorns, and during the winter they creep down to prey on livestock. As big as bears, some of them, but meaner. And when the livestock runs out, they prey on us. Aelin patted Lysandra's shoulder. Sounds like your kind of creature. Aedion went on. They're white and gray, so you can barely make them out against the snow and rock. You can't really tell they're on you until you're staring right into their pale green eyes. Then his smile faltered as Lysandra fixed her green eyes on him and cocked her head. Despite herself, Aelin laughed. I love that scene. Like I've said before, it's nice to get these little pockets of them just messing around and having fun, because guys, I'll remind you, they're all 19 or in their 20s. And so it's cool to see them have these really sweet moments here and there amidst all the depressing and dark stuff that happens in this book. Anyways, we're gonna jump to Cael's POV because he is meeting Aelin and her court in the catacombs. And this is where we're going to start seeing, they've already kind of lightly referred to them as this, but this is where it starts becoming consistent. Aelin and her court is what they basically call Aedion, Rowan, and Lysandra. So her people that she surrounds herself with. That's her court. So they're all meeting in the catacombs, and we find out that Aelin has actually been down there before. That one day that Cael was down there in the shadow market talking to Ress and Brullo, and then Aelin just showed up. Turns out that day she was also down in the catacombs. And we learned that in addition to opium, apparently down here is also being sold bottled hellfire. And supposedly it's being kept down here in the catacombs. And this is when Aelin reveals to her court and Cael that she is going to take down the clock tower using hellfire. Chapter 50. So they enter an area of the catacombs that looks a lot more like a temple, but not a good temple, okay? This is a temple for either the god or goddess of truth. I forget which one. It doesn't matter. All that you need to know is that they are the deity of truth. But here's the thing. This isn't like the living a happy, honest life kind of deity of truth. Okay, these are people who are etching into the walls the most atrocious and horrible things that they have ever done. This is basically a room full of confessions, people who have confessed to murders, people who have confessed to doing horrible things, and it's all just etched on the walls throughout this entire tomb. Needless to say, they're all getting very bad vibes from this place, so they want to find the bottled hellfire and get out of this temple as soon as humanly possible. They're struggling to find it when Aelin realizes that she has Damaris on her. Now, I will remind you, back in book 1, Throne of Glass, Gavin tells us that this sword is the sword of truth. So she is like, I wonder if it's related in any way. So Aelin pulls the sword out of her sheath, and literally, conveniently, a couple seconds later, someone is like, oh, I found the hellfire, it's over here. Interesting, right? Anywho, so they're going over to where the bottle Hellfire is when they see that there is a bunch of symbols written on the wall. So they are able to read these symbols and they start to read it and they realize that it is about the Valg and the First War and the Valg King Erewhon. Remember, this is the battle that Caelena and Gavin were the heroes of. As they keep reading, they very quickly find out that this is King Gavin's confession. So they're like, what did he have to confess about the First War? So they keep reading and they find out some earth-shattering things. Turns out the Eye of Caelena, the necklace that Aelin wears, was used to put Erewhon to sleep. Then they sealed him in a tomb beneath a mountain called the Black Mountains. In other words, Queen Caelena and King Gavin have been lying to us. They did not put down the King Erewhon. He is in fact alive. He is just asleep. Not only is this earth-shattering news, but they at least have a location, right? But they realize there's no such thing as the Black Mountains. They're not familiar with a Black Mountains. But then Rowan, fortunately, but unfortunately, he reveals to everyone present that Black Mountains in the old language is Morath. Who is currently at Morath? Duke Parrington, Uncle Vernon, Manon and the 13, and Aelin. Chapter 51, this is Manon POV as she is meeting with the 13 to tell them about her new assignment from the Duke to pick another coven. And they absolutely refuse. And they all start listing off all the reasons this is a horrible idea. When Manon is like, hold on, she realizes that this is an intervention for her. And they have all very much planned this intervention and what they were going to say to her. Naturally, because this very much goes against witch culture, and we know that Manon is a stickler for witch tradition, she starts to lose her mind and go head to head with Asterin when a young man wearing a black wordstone collar enters the room and the lights go out. Instantly, a bunch of the witches start screaming their heads off in pain and in agony and in terror. And you know what? Manon understands why, because she is reliving the day that she killed the Crocian witch in Airfire. Now, let us pause here for a second and step away from the book and think about the implications of this. In Airfire, when Aelin was under the Valg influence of the princes wearing the collar, they were making her relive all of the biggest regrets in her life, all of the most horrible things she has ever experienced, okay? She was witnessing the death of her parents. She was witnessing the attempted assassination on herself. She was witnessing the time that she let Sam go along with a plan that she did not feel comfortable with, and he ended up dead. She is reliving all of the horrible, most gruesome things that have ever happened in her life. And then even when she was running through that cemetery and the Valg influence came on her again, she was witnessing the death of Nehemia. These are things that have traumatized Aelin throughout her entire life. Now we're seeing Manon, who quite literally has seen it all. She has done the most unspeakable things. She is quite literally supposed to be one of the most horrible villains in this entire book. And you mean to tell me that when she has to relive the most gruesome, most horrible thing that she has ever experienced in life, it's killing that Crocian witch, her enemy, someone who's supposed to be your enemy. All she did was behead her. But the Crocian witch said something to Manon that has been sticking with her ever since about being made to be evil and not being born to be evil. This should be a huge warning flag to you about where Manon is, because Manon has a wall up, and because it's not like Manon's first person point of view in this book, we don't really get to see what Manon's heart and mind are going through. We only see what she wants everyone else to see. This is the first true moment that we get to view inside Manon's heart. Sorry, that got a little deep, but I needed you to see that. I needed you to see that. To me, this is one of the most overlooked details in this book. Well, Manon snaps out of it and she tackles the guy in the wordstone collar and he says, "Kill me, please. My name is Roland." And Manon does, but I want you to realize that this is Roland, Dorian's cousin from Crown of Midnight. I mean, don't get me wrong, he was a horrible man, but he didn't deserve that. He was a horrible teenager, okay? Teens are horrible sometimes. He didn't even have the opportunity to grow up. and make things right and become a better person, which also is way too deep of me. But I need you to understand the gravity of a lot of the things that are happening in this book. Anywho, now there is a small detail, and I will tell you guys, this is my either third or fourth time reading through Throne of Glass, and when I tell you that I never caught this detail, like it always went way over my head. So I am making a point to pull it out in case you, like me, overlooked this part every single time you read the books. Turns out Sorrel, Vesta, Lynn, and Imogen were the only witches in the 13 who did not seem affected by the Valg influence, okay? They're the only ones who were not screaming and the only ones who are not throwing up after the relief of no longer being under the Valg influence, okay? Something else that makes them all unique is that they are the only ones in the covens with black eyes flecked with gold. Nothing happens by coincidence in a Sarah J. Maas book, okay? So I want you to like put a pin in that detail, and we're not going to revisit it for like an insanely long time. But you know, put a pin in it. Write it down on a sticky note if you need to, but just remember that. Manon decides, however, that she will also put a mental note that they're the only ones with black eyes flecked with gold, but for right now, she needs to hide Roland's body. So her and the witches go to do that, and she realizes that Roland was sent as a warning. Did Duke Barrington not tell her that if she did not get in line and comply with all of his demands, that he would set one of his Valg princes on her in her coven, which is exactly what he did. So Manon's like, shoot, I need to do something about this as soon as humanly possible. So the next day, Manon goes hunting for Caelena. She finds Caelena is able to get her alone, and she asks her about her shadow fire. And this is when Caelena reveals that she had magic before, but then it was, and I quote from SJM herself, "It was melded with another source. Now it is the power of every world and every life." Interesting. Chapter 52, this is in Cael's POV. He's still uncomfortable working with Aelin's court per se, but he realizes, it is for the greater good, so he's gonna stomach it for now. And also for the first time, he's realizing that he doesn't have anger or jealousy when he sees Rowan and Aelin together. If anything, he's starting to really understand them as a couple. Like, it just makes sense to him. And I do also think this is largely in part to the fact that he's now like giving Nesrin an actual shot. But this is good because it means that Cael's starting to heal. So they're all talking, hanging out, planning, doing whatever when Nesrin comes up to them, and she reports that the king is having Valg foot soldiers sent from Morath back to Aelin. And then the second thing that is even more horrifying is that the king now has Iron Teeth witches flying wyverns as his aerial army. Now, if you have not seen the map in the book, now is a really good time to look. For some reason, I cannot find a good map online. I'll note for you that Aniel is the closest city to the Farian Gap, and this is where Cael's father is the lord. So Daddy Westfall is the Lord of Aniel, and it's what Cael was supposed to be Lord of, but he gave it up for Dorian. So the real question is does he work for the king, or could he potentially be an ally? Because that could be the first line of defense. Cael is not quite sure, but he says that's something that they could maybe find out if it comes to it. And later that night, Aelin, she's starting to spiral, okay? Once again, I'll remind you that she's like 19 at this point, but she's starting to panic because it's becoming a lot more real. She thought she had time to bring magic back, to kill Dorian, to dethrone the king, to get the word keys, but war is coming now, and she's not ready. Like, she thought she would at least be the Queen of Terrasen by the time that this war came to a head, but now she's having to be like a maybe queen fighting this war. And then on top of that, if you guys don't remember, in Crown of Midnight, Aelin barely survived her brawl with Baba Yellowlegs. And Baba Yellowlegs wasn't even trained for combat, and she was like an old witch, okay? So now there are hundreds upon hundreds of witches trained for combat, and they have wyverns. That is just a horrifying thought for Aelin. In case I didn't mention earlier, while Aelin is kind of freaking out about this, and Rowan is giving her a listening ear and he's trying to comfort her, they're walking back to the apartment when Lorcan sneaks up to them and puts a knife to Aelin's throat. Lorcan is demanding the word key, and they're like, no, absolutely not, we're keeping it, but he reveals to them that they're on the same side. Lorcan also wants to destroy the word keys. Now, this is crazy crazy because Lorcan is blood sworn to Maeve. And if you're like, wait, then how is it possible for him to be on their side? Let's dive a little bit more into what being blood sworn actually means. It's not like Ella Enchanted, where it's just like, you must obey every single thing that I say. Being blood sworn to someone bounds you by your intentions and not your actions. So, for example, Rowan is blood sworn to Aelin. So everything he does must be in Aelin's best interest. And since Lorcan truly honestly believes that destroying these word keys are in Maeve's best interest, even though it's not what Maeve wants and Maeve wants the word keys, Lorcan truly believes that for her to have access to these word keys would not be good for her. So he wants to destroy them for the sake of protecting her, almost like from herself in a way. So that is why Lorcan is able to like go rogue without breaking his blood sworn duties. But I will also say there is a caveat here that technically Maeve can command Lorcan to do something, but it's almost kind of like oaths, you know, like there's definitely loopholes and every single word matters. So Aelin could technically make a blood sworn command to Rowan that he would have to keep, but Aelin refuses to do that because she thinks that's an abuse of the blood sworn power. Maeve, on the other hand, does do that. So it is, yes, he's bound by his intentions, but it is not that she can never make a direct command that he has to follow. She can, but she didn't in this scenario, if that makes sense. We're going to have examples of this in the future that will help clarify if you do not understand it right now, so it is okay if you don't fully understand it. There is a lot of nuances with the Bloodsworn Pact that we will definitely be uncovering throughout the book, so it is 110% fine if you do not fully understand how Bloodsworn Pacts work at this very moment. All you need to know is that right now, Lorcan is only bound by his intentions toward Maeve, not by any specific actions. Lorcan asks them to consider the fact that he's actually trying to help them, and then he leaves. Now, I will just take a moment to say that Rowan's absolutely devastated because, once again, Lorcan totally could have killed Aelin, and he was totally defenseless and couldn't do anything. That's absolutely killing him because despite how powerful he is, Lorcan is stronger. Chapter 53, we are gonna stop by Valgdorian real quick. He is torturing more rebels and he is fading away even more. That is all you need to know. SJM just wants to remind you every couple chapters that Dorian is still there and Dorian is still suffering. Chapter 54, this is in Manon's POV as she is reading a letter from the grandmother Blackbeak. Elide is also in the room with her. And Manon informs Elide after reading this letter that the 13 are going to be leaving in 3 days and they're going to be gone for a few more. And Elide basically needs to lay low during that time. But Elide does plan to run away while they're gone. So Elide's like, I'll have no problem laying low because I won't be here. So turns out Manon's letter from her grandmother doesn't mention anything about the breeding experiment, despite the fact that that's why Manon wrote her in the first place, to get some guidance on how to handle the situation. So she's a little disappointed that her grandmother didn't even mention it. It didn't even come up. The letter is basically just to make sure that Manon spends those 3 days preparing for this big meeting. So let's talk about the mission that the 13 are going to go on. They're flying to Aelin to establish a safe perimeter for the grandmother Blackbeak to show the weapon that the grandmothers have been working on to the king. Remember, this is something that Duke Parrington said is going to change the tide of the war. We still don't know what this is. We just know that a weapon exists and the grandmother Blackbeak, along with the help of some of the other grandmothers, did make it. But Manon and her 13 are also going to be there as bodyguards, so she decides that she's going to use that opportunity to talk to her grandmother in person about her concerns with Duke Parrington. But then she's also realizing, I don't know if the Duke is going to wait that long. He might want a name of a coven before we leave. She decides she's going to deal with that when that comes. So she's a little stressed about that when we also find out that Manon's spies have been reporting to her that during the night, while everyone is sleeping, they have spotted winged creatures with twisted human forms soaring through the skies around Morath at night. So that's horrifying. We will learn more about that later, but for right now, we are going to jump to Caltain's POV for the first time since, I think, the first book. And now this is bonkers, okay? Hold on to your hats. So it turns out, Caltain hid in the shadows while the prince took over her body, and she allowed him to think that she was gone, but she was really just biding her time and waiting. Then, when he was least expecting it, she killed the Valg prince with her fire. She's been pretending ever since that she's been still possessed by a Valg prince, but Caelena is very much herself. The Valg took things like her memory of her name, so she gave herself a new one, Death, Devourer of Worlds. Guys, who would have thought that the pick-me girl who was only obsessed with court gossip at the beginning of this book is the one who bested a Valg prince with magic she never even knew that she had. Caelena, the queen that you are, I love you. Chapter 55. This is an Aelin's POV, and she and Rowan startle awake because someone is trying to get into the apartment. They run to the front door where Aelin is also armed and ready to go, and when they open the door, it is Evangeline, disheveled and sobbing in an absolute blubbering mess. And when they ask her what's wrong, she says that the king's men came in the night and took Lysandra, said that she had shapeshifter blood and she needed to be executed immediately. Aelin immediately has Evangeline given to Nesrin so that Evangeline can stay with Nesrin's father in the bakery. When Cael shows up, turns out that one of Ren's men inside the castle contacted him just minutes ago. There is going to be a meeting that takes place in Oakwald. Remember, Manon's job was to organize a meeting in Aelin. I guess they chose Oakwald, and that is the meeting that they're talking about, okay? It's going to be between the king, Dorian, and the wing leader of the Iron Teeth Aerial Army, which we know today to be Manon, with a delivery of one new prisoner headed for Morath. We also learn that they take people who have very strong magic in their blood and they turn them into Valg princes. So we are now learning that they are not going to actually execute Lysandra. They found out just how much shapeshifter blood is in her system, and they are going to send her to Morath to become a Valg prince. As if this moment wasn't already intense enough. If you feel like having a good cry, this is when Aelin realizes that they're going to put a Valg prince collar on Lysandra, and so she turns to Cael and begs him to save her best friend. When he says, never again. And he's not saying that I am not going to protect Lysandra. He is promising her that never again will he let what happened to Nehemia happen to one of Aelin's friends. He is not going to let Lysandra be the next Nehemia. Ugh, that just breaks my heart. But I love it, and it's a beautiful moment, and I need you to appreciate it. All right, that is the end of part 5 of Queen of Shadows. Thank you for watching today, and I will see you next week for part 6.